The millionaire Vasconcelos always believed that money gave her the right to step on anyone. Upon entering a luxury restaurant, she made a point of humiliating a humble waiter, laughing at him in front of everyone. Poor people always have that greasy smell. That's why they never get out of misery. But what she didn't know was that this man was hiding a secret that could destroy her reputation. Just 2 days later, he reappeared, but this time as a powerful and influential billionaire. And in front of the elite, he did something that left Helena completely in shock. What he revealed that night was only the beginning of a ruthless revenge, and now Helena will beg for a second chance. But will it be too late? Helena Vasconcelos sauntered into Le Ciel, her Louboutin heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The maitre d' greeted her with a practiced smile, but she barely acknowledged him as she swept past, her designer gown trailing behind her like a cape of entitlement. The restaurant was a bastion of luxury, its crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over the white-clothed tables. Helena's table, as always, was positioned in the center of the room, a stage for her nightly performance of wealth and superiority. As she settled into her seat, a young waiter approached. His name tag read Eduardo, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in his crisp but clearly well-worn uniform. "Good evening, madam. May I offer you our wine list?" Eduardo's voice was soft, respectful. Helena's nose wrinkled as if she'd smelled something unpleasant. "You may not," she said sharply. "Not until you've done something about that ghastly smell. Do you bathe in the Friar?" Eduardo's cheeks flushed, but he maintained his composure. "I apologize if I've offended you, madam. I can ask another server to—" No, Helena interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. "You'll do. Just try not to breathe on me or my food. I'd hate for my caviar to taste like French fries." A titter of laughter rose from the nearby tables. Helena basked in it, her lips curling into a cruel smile. She lived for moments like these, opportunities to remind the world of the vast gulf between herself and the common rabble. Eduardo swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Of course, madam. I'll keep my distance. Would you like to hear tonight's specials?" Helena waved a bejeweled hand dismissively. "I know what I want. Bring me the lobster thermidor and a bottle of Krug Clos d'Ambonnet. And do try not to fumble it. That champagne costs more than you make in a month." As Eduardo retreated, Helena turned to her dining companions, a collection of fellow socialites and hedge fund managers. "Can you believe the help these days?" she said loudly. "I swear if it weren't for the food, I'd never set foot in these places. The stench of poverty is almost overwhelming." Her friends laughed on cue, but a few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Helena didn't notice, or didn't care. She was too busy reveling in her own cruelty, unaware that her words were sowing seeds that would soon sprout into a harvest of comeuppance. Throughout the meal, Helena continued to berate Eduardo at every opportunity. She complained about the temperature of her water, the placement of her silverware, and even the way he poured her wine. Each time, Eduardo responded with quiet professionalism, but the strain was evident in the tightness around his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands. As the evening wore on, other diners began to take notice of Helena's behavior. Whispers and disapproving glances were exchanged, but no one dared to confront the notorious socialite. Helena Vasconcelos was known for her vindictive nature, and crossing her could mean social and financial ruin. By the time dessert arrived, Eduardo looked as though he'd aged years in a single evening. Helena, on the other hand, was practically glowing with malicious satisfaction. "I must say," she announced to the room at large, "this has been a most entertaining dinner. It's so rare to find staff who can take criticism with such grace." She emphasized the last word with a mocking lilt. Eduardo set down her crème brûlée with steady hands. "Is there anything else I can do for you, madam?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Helena's eyes glittered with cruelty. "Yes, actually. You can tell me something. How does it feel to know that you'll never be anything more than this? A servant reeking of grease catering to your betters?" The restaurant fell silent. Even Helena's sycophantic friends looked shocked at her audacity. Eduardo stood perfectly still, his face a mask of control. After a long moment, he spoke. It feels, madam, like an opportunity. Helena blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected response. An opportunity? For what, pray tell? Eduardo met her gaze, and for the first time that night, Helena saw a flash of something in his eyes. A strength, a determination that made her shift uneasily in her seat. An opportunity to learn, to grow, and to remember that true worth isn't measured by the price of one's champagne or the cut of one's clothes. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of steel beneath it. If you'll excuse me, I have other tables to attend to. With that, Eduardo turned and walked away, leaving Helena sputtering in indignation. She quickly recovered, laughing it off to her companions, but the laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. Something about Eduardo's words had unsettled her, though she'd never admit it. As she left the restaurant that night, tossing a paltry tip on the table with a sneer, Helena had no idea that her world was about to be turned upside down. In just 2 days' time, she would come face to face with the consequences of her cruelty, and the lessons she would learn would shake the very foundations of her gilded existence. Little did Helena know that Eduardo's words about opportunity were far more than just a philosophical musing. They were a foreshadowing of events to come, events that would force her to confront the ugliness of her own nature and the fragility of the world she'd built around herself. As her limousine pulled away from Le Ciel, Helena dismissed the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. She was Helena Vasconcelos, after all. What could a mere waiter possibly do to someone like her? She was about to find out. 2 days later, Helena stood before her full-length mirror admiring her reflection. Her latest acquisition, a couture gown that cost more than most people's annual salary, hugged her figure perfectly. Tonight was the social event of the season, an exclusive gala for the city's elite, hosted by a mysterious new player in the business world. As her chauffeur navigated the streets towards the venue, Helena scrolled through her phone, catching up on the latest gossip. Rumors swirled about the gala's host, a self-made billionaire who had risen from humble beginnings to create a culinary empire. The details were scarce, which only added to the intrigue. This better be worth my time, Helena muttered to herself as the car pulled up to a grand mansion. Red carpets lined the entrance, and paparazzi jostled for position behind velvet ropes. Helena plastered on her most dazzling smile as she stepped out, ready to bask in the flashbulbs and adoration. As she made her way inside, Helena's eyes widened. The mansion's interior was a masterpiece of luxury and taste. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over marble floors, and priceless art adorned the walls. Waiters in immaculate uniforms glided between guests, offering flutes of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Helena accepted a glass, her eyes scanning the room for familiar faces. She spotted several of her usual crowd, CEOs, hedge fund managers, and fellow socialites. But there were also unfamiliar faces, people who carried themselves with the quiet confidence of true power. As the evening progressed, the anticipation in the room grew palpable. Everyone was eager to meet the mysterious host, to curry favor with this new titan of industry. Helena found herself growing impatient. She was used to being the center of attention, and this anonymous figure was stealing her spotlight. Finally, a hush fell over the crowd as a man stepped onto a small stage at the far end of the room. Helena craned her neck to get a better look, then froze, her champagne flute slipping from her fingers and shattering on the marble floor. It was Eduardo. Gone was the ill-fitting waiter's uniform, replaced by an impeccably tailored tuxedo. His hair, once hastily combed back for his shift, was now styled with precision, but it was his eyes that truly captured attention. They sparkled with confidence, and, Helena realized with a sinking feeling, recognition. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Eduardo's voice carried easily through the room, smooth and authoritative. "I'd like to welcome you all to my home. For those who don't know me, my name is Eduardo Silveira, CEO of Culinary Horizons International." A wave of applause swept through the room. Helena remained rooted to the spot, her mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some sort of joke, a cruel prank orchestrated by her rivals. But as Eduardo continued his speech, detailing the rise of his restaurant empire and his plans for the future, the truth became undeniable. The man she had humiliated, the waiter she had deemed worthless, was now standing before her as one of the most powerful figures in the room. "My journey hasn't always been easy," Eduardo was saying, his gaze sweeping across the audience. "I've faced many challenges, many setbacks, but perhaps the most valuable lessons I've learned have come from the people I've encountered along the way, both those who showed kindness and those who did not." His eyes locked onto Helena's, and she felt a chill run down her spine. There was no mistaking his meaning. She tried to look away, to blend into the crowd, but it was too late. Eduardo had spotted her, and a small, knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth. "In fact," he continued, "I'd like to share a story with you all. A story about the importance of treating others with dignity and respect, regardless of their station in life." Helena's heart began to race. She looked around frantically, searching for an escape route, but the crowd had closed in around her, eagerly awaiting Eduardo's tale. "Just 2 nights ago, I had an encounter that reminded me of why I started this company in the first place," Eduardo began. "I was working a shift at one of our restaurants, something I do regularly to stay connected to our staff and customers." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Helena felt sick. "On this particular night, I had the pleasure of serving a certain socialite." Eduardo's eyes never left Helena's face. "This individual took it upon herself to remind me in no uncertain terms of what she perceived as my place in the world. She mocked my appearance, my scent, even my very humanity." The room had grown deathly quiet. All eyes were now turned to Helena, who stood frozen in place, her face a mask of horror and humiliation. "But you know what?" Eduardo's voice softened. "I'm grateful for that experience. It reminded me of the person I never want to become, no matter how successful I may be. It reinforced my commitment to treating every human being with dignity and respect." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Helena could feel the judgment of the entire room bearing down on her. Her carefully crafted image, her social standing, it was all crumbling before her eyes. "So," Eduardo continued, a hint of challenge in his voice, "I'd like to propose a toast. To humility, to kindness, and to the understanding that true wealth isn't measured by the size of one's bank account, but by the content of one's character." The room erupted in applause. Glasses were raised and people turned to their neighbors, nodding in agreement with Eduardo's words. Helena stood alone in a sea of people, untouched and unseen. As the applause died down, Eduardo stepped off the stage and began to make his way through the crowd. People surged forward to congratulate him, to shake his hand, to be seen in his presence. Helena watched in disbelief as the very people who had once fawned over her now turned their backs, eager to align themselves with the new power in the room. She needed to leave. Now. Before Eduardo reached her, before she had to face him and the consequences of her actions. Helena turned, ready to flee, but found her path blocked by a wall of bodies. She was trapped, cornered like an animal, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. And then suddenly Eduardo was standing before her. Up close, she could see the same quiet dignity she had dismissed so cruelly just 2 nights ago. But now that dignity was backed by power, real power, the kind that made Helena's social machinations look like child's play. "Ms. Vasconcelos?" Eduardo said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm so glad you could make it. I was hoping we might have a chance to continue our conversation from the other night." Helena opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she found herself truly speechless. Eduardo's smile never wavered, but his eyes held a mixture of emotions Helena couldn't quite decipher. Was it pity, triumph, or something else entirely? "Perhaps," he continued, "we could step into my study for a moment. There's something I'd like to discuss with you in private." It wasn't a request. Helena nodded mutely, her legs moving of their own accord as she followed Eduardo through the crowd. She could feel the eyes of the other guests on her back, could almost hear the whispers starting already. By morning, her humiliation would be the talk of the town. As they reached a heavy oak door at the far end of the room, Helena steeled herself. Whatever Eduardo had planned, she would face it with the same haughty disdain she'd always used as armor. She was still Helena Vasconcelos after all. She could survive this. But as the door closed behind them, cutting off the sounds of the party, Helena felt a tremor of real fear. She was about to learn that some actions have consequences that no amount of money or social standing can erase. And Eduardo, it seemed, was just getting started. Chapter 3. The Reckoning. The study was a stark contrast to the opulent party outside. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and leather-bound books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a single folder. Eduardo gestured for Helena to take a seat in one of the high-backed chairs facing the desk. She complied, her movements stiff and uncertain. Gone was the confident socialite who had ruled her world with an iron fist. In her place sat a woman on the brink of losing everything she held dear. Eduardo settled into the chair behind the desk, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp and focused. For a long moment, he simply regarded Helena in silence, as if weighing his words carefully. "Do you know why I invited you here tonight, Ms. Vasconcelos?" he finally asked, his voice calm and measured. Helena lifted her chin, attempting to summon some of her usual bravado. "To humiliate me, I presume. To extract your pound of flesh for the way I treated you. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded. Is that all?" Eduardo's expression remained impassive. "Humiliation was never my goal, Ms. Vasconcelos, nor was revenge. I brought you here to offer you something far more valuable. Perspective." He opened the folder on his desk and began to leaf through its contents. "In the past 48 hours, I've had my team compile quite an extensive dossier on you. Your business dealings, your social circles, your family history, it's all here." Helena's heart rate quickened. "That's an invasion of privacy. I could sue you for..." "For what?" Eduardo interrupted, his tone still maddeningly calm. "For accessing public records. For speaking to people who know you. I assure you, Ms. Vasconcelos, everything in this folder was obtained legally and ethically. Unlike some of your own business practices, I might add." He pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across the desk. Helena leaned forward, her eyes widening as she scanned its contents. It was a detailed breakdown of her financial holdings, including several offshore accounts she had thought were untraceable. "How did you..." she began, but Eduardo held up a hand to silence her. "That's not important. What's important is what this information represents. You see, Ms. Vasconcelos, I've spent the last 2 days trying to understand you, to figure out how someone could treat another human being the way you treated me, with such casual cruelty and disdain." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Helena's face. "And do you know what I discovered? Fear. Overwhelming, all-consuming fear." Helena scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. "Fear? What could I possibly have to be afraid of?" "Irrelevance," Eduardo said simply. "The fear that without your money, without your social status, you would cease to exist in the eyes of the world. That you would become invisible, just like the waiter you mocked so viciously." His words hit Helena like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to protest, to deny his accusations, but found she couldn't form the words. Eduardo continued, his voice softening slightly. "I recognize that fear, Ms. Vasconcelos, because I've felt it too. I grew up with nothing. I know what it's like to be invisible, to feel worthless. But I chose to use that fear as motivation to better myself and help others, not to tear them down." Helena stood frozen, her cheeks burning with shame. The room around her seemed to blur as the weight of her actions crashed down upon her. She had spent years cultivating an image of superiority, using her wealth and status as a shield against her own insecurities. Now, that shield lay shattered at her feet. Eduardo's words continued to echo through the ballroom. "Tonight I'm not here to humiliate you, Ms. Vasconcelos. I'm here to offer you a choice, a chance to redefine yourself and your legacy." The crowd murmured, their attention riveted on the unfolding drama. Helena felt their eyes boring into her, judging her. She wanted nothing more than to flee, to escape this nightmare. But something in Eduardo's tone, a hint of genuine compassion, kept her rooted to the spot. "I'm launching a new initiative," Eduardo announced, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling back on Helena. "A program to provide culinary training and business mentorship to underprivileged youth. It's a chance to give others the opportunities I was fortunate enough to receive." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Ms. Vasconcelos, I'd like to invite you to be a part of this program, not as a benefactor writing checks from afar, but as an active participant, to work alongside these young people, to learn from them as they learn from you." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Helena felt her world tilting on its axis. This was not the public humiliation she had expected. It was something far more challenging, a call to transformation. I don't understand," Helena stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you offer me this chance after how I treated you?" Eduardo's expression softened further. "Because I believe in second chances, Ms. Vasconcelos, and because I think you have more to offer the world than just your money. This is an opportunity to discover that for yourself." As the weight of his words settled over her, Helena felt a strange mix of emotions churning within her. Fear, shame, and uncertainty, warred with a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The possibility of redemption, of becoming something more than the caricature of wealth and privilege she had allowed herself to become, suddenly seemed within reach. I don't know if I can do this," Helena admitted, her voice trembling. Eduardo nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It won't be easy. You'll face challenges you've never encountered before. You'll have to confront parts of yourself you've kept hidden away. But I believe you have the strength to do it, if you're willing to try." As Helena stood there, teetering on the precipice of decision, she felt the weight of her past pressing down on her. Every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every person she had deemed beneath her notice, they all seemed to crowd around her, accusing specters of the person she had become. But there was something else too, a faint glimmer of the person she could be, a version of herself that she had glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments, someone capable of kindness, of growth, of genuine connection with others. I'll do it," Helena said, her voice barely audible at first. Then, gathering her courage, she spoke louder. "I accept your offer, Mr. Eduardo. I want to be part of this program." A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd. Eduardo's face broke into a warm smile. "Thank you, Ms. Vasconcelos. Your journey starts now." As the evening wound down, Helena found herself in a daze. The other guests regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Some approached her, offering tentative words of encouragement. Others kept their distance, clearly unsure what to make of this unexpected turn of events. Helena barely registered any of it. Her mind was already racing ahead, grappling with the enormity of the change she had just committed to. How would she, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, cope with the demands of this program? Could she really connect with the young people she would be working alongside? As she made her way to the exit, Eduardo appeared at her side. "Ms. Vasconcelos," he said quietly, "I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that you won't be alone in this. My team and I will be there to support you every step of the way." Helena nodded, unable to form words. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt as if she were leaving behind more than just a party. She was leaving behind a version of herself, stepping into an unknown future. The drive home was a blur. Helena's chauffeur, accustomed to her usual stream of complaints and criticisms, was puzzled by her silence. As the city lights streamed past the windows, Helena found herself truly looking at the world around her for the first time in years. She saw the late-night workers waiting at bus stops, the homeless huddled in doorways, the tired faces of people heading home after long shifts. How long had it been since she had really seen these people? How long had she dismissed them as mere background noise in her gilded life? As the car pulled up to her mansion, Helena felt a sudden reluctance to go inside. The opulent facade, once a source of pride, now seemed hollow and meaningless. She dismissed her chauffeur and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring up at the house that no longer felt like home. With a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy front door and stepped inside. The cavernous entryway echoed with her footsteps as she made her way to her bedroom. Every piece of expensive art, every crystal chandelier, every marble surface seemed to mock her with its excess. Helena collapsed onto her bed, fully clothed, her mind whirling with the events of the evening. As exhaustion finally overtook her, she drifted into a fitful sleep, haunted by dreams of Eduardo's kind eyes and the accusing stares of those she had wronged. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but Helena felt anything but refreshed. As she stumbled to her ensuite bathroom, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Gone was the carefully cultivated mask of superiority. In its place was a vulnerable, uncertain face that looked years older than it had just days ago. As she went through the motions of her morning routine, Helena's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Eduardo, providing details about the first day of the program. It would start next week, giving her a few days to prepare. Prepare for what exactly? Helena had no idea. Her wardrobe full of designer clothes suddenly seemed ridiculous. What does one wear to work in a kitchen? She had never so much as boiled an egg in her life. Panic began to set in as the reality of her situation truly hit her. She had agreed to this on impulse, swept up in the moment and the powerful emotions of the evening. Now, in the harsh light of day, doubt gnawed at her. Could she really go through with this? She was tempted to call Eduardo to back out of the whole thing, but something stopped her. The memory of his belief in her, the chance he was offering, it was more than she deserved and she knew it. With trembling fingers, Helena opened her laptop and began to research. Basic cooking techniques, kitchen safety, the fundamentals of running a restaurant. She threw herself into learning with a desperation she had never felt before. As the days passed, Helena's anxiety grew. She barely ate, barely slept. The thought of facing those young people, of trying to teach them anything when she herself knew nothing, was terrifying. But beneath the fear, there was something else, growing, a tiny seed of determination. Finally, the day arrived. Helena stood outside the community center where the program was being held, her heart pounding. She had opted for the simplest clothes she owned, a plain blouse and slacks that still probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobes. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was already buzzing with activity. Young people from all walks of life were gathered, their excited chatter filling the air. At the front of the room stood Eduardo, his presence commanding yet welcoming. As Helena made her way towards him, she felt the conversation around her die down. Eyes turned to her, some curious, some wary, some openly hostile. She fought the urge to turn and run. Eduardo spotted her and smiled, gesturing for her to join him at the front. "Everyone," he announced, "I'd like you to meet Ms. Helena Vasconcelos. She'll be working alongside us in this program, learning just as you are." The room was silent for a moment, then exploded into whispers. Helena could catch snippets of conversation. "Isn't she the one who... I heard she's worth millions. What's she doing here?" Eduardo raised his hands, calling for quiet. "I know many of you have heard stories about Ms. Vasconcelos, but I want you all to remember why we're here. To learn, to grow, and to give each other second chances. Can we all agree to start fresh today?" There were nods and murmurs of assent from around the room. Helena felt a lump forming in her throat. She didn't deserve this kindness, this chance at redemption, but she was determined not to waste it. "Thank you all for having me," she said, her voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. I know I have a lot to learn, not just about cooking and business, but about life, about treating people with respect and kindness. I hope you'll all be patient with me as I try to become a better person." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a young woman in the front row spoke up. "We all make mistakes, Ms. Vasconcelos. What matters is that you're here now, trying to make things right." Helena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, nodding gratefully at the young woman. As Eduardo began to outline the program, Helena felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The coming weeks and months would be unlike anything she had ever experienced, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive, truly present in her own life. The program began in earnest, and Helena found herself plunged into a world she had never known existed. The kitchen was a chaotic, noisy place, filled with the clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of food on the stove, and the constant chatter of her fellow participants. At first, she was completely out of her depth. She burned herself on hot pans, cut her fingers while chopping vegetables, and ruined more dishes than she could count. The other participants, mostly teenagers and young adults from underprivileged backgrounds, watched her struggles with a mix of amusement and grudging respect. One young man, Carlos, took it upon himself to help her. "Here, Ms. V," he said, gently correcting her grip on the knife. "Like this. It's safer and more efficient." Helena smiled gratefully at him, trying to ignore the ache in her back and feet from standing for hours. She had never worked so hard in her life, but there was something oddly satisfying about it. As the weeks passed, Helena slowly began to improve. She learned to dice onions without crying, to tell when a steak was perfectly medium rare by touch, to balance flavors in a sauce. But more importantly, she began to form connections with the other participants. She learned their stories of hardship, of dreams deferred, of determination in the face of overwhelming odds. She began to see them not as abstractions or charity cases, but as individuals with hopes and fears, just like her own. One evening, as they were cleaning up after a particularly grueling day, a young woman named Tasha approached Helena. "Can I ask you something, Ms. V?" she said hesitantly. Helena nodded, bracing herself for what was sure to be an uncomfortable question about her past behavior. "Why did you really decide to do this program?" Tasha asked. "I mean, you could be anywhere in the world doing anything you want. Why choose to spend your time here with us?" Helena was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Honestly, Tasha, at first it was about guilt, about trying to make up for the person I used to be. But now," she paused, surprised by the realization that was forming, "now I'm here because I want to be, because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that matters." Tasha nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You know, when you first showed up, we all thought you'd quit after a week, but you proved us wrong. You're tougher than you look, Ms. V." Helena felt a warmth spreading through her chest at Tasha's words. It was a feeling she was starting to recognize, pride. Not the hollow pride of wealth and status, but the genuine pride of accomplishment, of perseverance in the face of difficulty. As the program progressed, Helena found herself taking on more responsibilities. She helped younger participants with their technique, offered advice on presentation, and even began to share some of her business knowledge. One day, Eduardo pulled her aside after a particularly successful service. "You've come a long way, Helena," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I have a proposition for you." Helena listened as Eduardo outlined his plan. He wanted to open a new restaurant, one staffed entirely by graduates of the program. And he wanted Helena to be a partner in the venture. "Me?" Helena gasped, shocked. "But I'm still learning. I'm not ready to—" Eduardo held up a hand, silencing her protests. "You have skills and experience that these young people need. Your business acumen, your connections in the high-end restaurant world, combined with their talent and drive, we could create something truly special." Helena felt a surge of excitement, followed quickly by fear. What if I fail them? What if I slip back into my old ways? Eduardo's eyes were kind but firm. "That's always a risk, Helena. But I believe in you. More importantly, those kids they believe in you. You're not the same person you were when this program started. Trust in that change." As Helena considered Eduardo's offer, she realized how far she had come. The woman who had sneered at a waiter for smelling like cooking oil now wore that same scent as a badge of honor. The socialite who had never worked a day in her life now had calluses on her hands and aches in her muscles that she wouldn't trade for all the luxury in the world. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm with newfound confidence. "On one condition, that we make sure to always have a program like this one to give others the same chance I was given." Eduardo's face broke into a wide smile. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Helena threw herself into the planning of the new restaurant, with the same intensity she had once reserved for social climbing. She worked closely with the young chefs, helping them refine their skills and develop a menu that blended their diverse backgrounds with high-end cuisine. The day of the restaurant's opening arrived, and Helena found herself standing in the gleaming, new kitchen, surrounded by her team. Gone were the designer dresses and perfectly coiffed hair. Instead, she wore a crisp chef's uniform, her hair tied back in a practical bun. As the first orders started coming in, Helena felt a familiar flutter of nerves. But as she watched her team spring into action, confidence replaced anxiety. These young people, once strangers, had become like family to her. They had taught her as much as she had taught them. The night was a resounding success. Critics raved about the innovative menu, the impeccable service, and the inspiring story behind the restaurant. But for Helena, the true victory came later that night, as the team gathered to celebrate after closing. Carlos raised a glass, his eyes shining with pride. "To Ms. V," he said, "who taught us that it's never too late to change, to learn, to become better." As the others echoed the toast, Helena felt tears welling up in her eyes. She looked around at the faces of these young people, Tasha, Carlos, and all the others, and saw not just employees or students, but friends, family. In that moment, Helena realized that she had gained far more than she had lost. Her old life of empty luxury and superficial relationships seemed like a distant memory. In its place was something real, something meaningful. As the celebration wound down and the team began to disperse, Helena found herself alone in the kitchen. She ran her hand along the smooth stainless steel countertop, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. She thought back to that night at the exclusive event, when Eduardo had offered her a choice. She had taken a leap into the unknown, terrified but desperate for change. Now, standing in this kitchen that represented so much more than just a business venture, she knew she had made the right decision. Helena Vasconcelos, once known for her arrogance and disdain, had found redemption in the most unlikely of places. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, forged connections deeper than any she had known before, and found a purpose that filled her with joy and pride. As she stood at the entrance of her newly opened community center, Helena took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp autumn air. The renovated building, once a dilapidated warehouse in one of New York City's less affluent neighborhoods, now stood as a beacon of hope and opportunity. Its fresh coat of paint gleamed in the morning sunlight, and the sound of laughter and chatter drifted through the open windows. Helena smoothed down her simple yet elegant blazer, a far cry from the designer outfits she once flaunted. Her perfectly manicured nails, once a symbol of her detachment from manual labor, now bore the slight imperfections of someone who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. As she pushed open the heavy glass doors, she was greeted by the warm smile of Maria, the center's receptionist. "Good morning, Ms. Vasconcelos," Maria chirped, her eyes crinkling with genuine affection. "The new batch of students for the culinary program has arrived. They're waiting in the main hall." Helena nodded, her heart quickening with anticipation. "Thank you, Maria. I'll be right there." As she made her way through the bustling corridors, Helena's mind drifted back to the events that had led her to this moment. It had been 2 years since that fateful night at Eduardo's charity gala, where her world had been turned upside down. After her public humiliation, Helena had fled the event, her cheeks burning with shame and her mind reeling from the shock. She had expected Eduardo to exact some form of revenge, to use his newfound power and influence to crush her socially or financially. But what followed was something she could never have anticipated. Instead of retribution, Eduardo had extended an olive branch. He had reached out to her the very next day, inviting her to meet him at one of his restaurants. Suspicious and wary, Helena had almost declined. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a glimmer of hope for redemption, had compelled her to accept. The meeting had been awkward at first, with Helena struggling to meet Eduardo's eyes. But as he began to speak, she found herself captivated by his story. Eduardo had grown up in poverty, working multiple jobs to support his family. His experience as a waiter had been just one step on his journey to success. He spoke of the hardships he had faced, the discrimination, the countless times he had been looked down upon by people like Helena. But instead of letting bitterness consume him, Eduardo had channeled his experiences into a mission. He had built his restaurant empire not just for profit, but as a means to create opportunities for others from disadvantaged backgrounds. His restaurants ran extensive training programs, giving people a chance to learn skills and build careers in the culinary world. As Helena listened, she felt something shift within her. The walls of privilege and prejudice that she had built around herself began to crumble. For the first time in her life, she truly saw the humanity in someone she had once considered beneath her. Eduardo's words that day had planted a seed in Helena's heart. "We all have the capacity for change," he had said, his eyes boring into hers. "The question is, do we have the courage to embrace it?" Those words had haunted Helena for days afterward. She found herself unable to return to her old life, to the shallow parties and meaningless pursuits that had once defined her existence. The disgust she had once felt for others now turned inward, as she began to recognize the emptiness of her own life. It was in this state of turmoil that Helena made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She reached out to Eduardo again, this time not as a socialite seeking absolution, but as a woman desperate to find meaning and purpose. To her surprise, Eduardo welcomed her with open arms. He offered her a chance to work in one of his restaurants, not as a figurehead or an investor, but as a trainee starting from the bottom just like any other employee. The transition had been far from easy. Helena's first days in the kitchen had been a humbling experience. Her designer clothes were replaced by a simple uniform, her manicured hands blistered from chopping vegetables and scrubbing pots. The other staff members regarded her with suspicion and barely concealed hostility, their memories of her previous behavior still fresh. But Helena persevered. With each passing day, she found herself growing stronger, more capable. She learned to take pride in a perfectly executed dish, in the satisfied smile of a customer. She began to form genuine connections with her co-workers, slowly earning their respect through her hard work and willingness to learn. As months passed, Helena's transformation became evident, not just to those around her, but to herself as well. The woman who had once sneered at the smell of cooking oil now reveled in the aromas of a bustling kitchen. Her laughter, once cold and artificial, became warm and genuine. It was during this time that Helena discovered her true passion, not just for cooking but for teaching and mentoring others. She found joy in helping new trainees, in sharing the skills she had learned. And it was this discovery that had led her to her current path. With Eduardo's guidance and support, Helena had conceived the idea for the community center. She poured her wealth and newfound passion into creating a place where people from all walks of life could come to learn, to grow, and to find opportunities they might never have had otherwise. As Helena pushed open the doors to the main hall, she was greeted by a sea of eager faces. The new culinary students, a diverse group ranging from teenagers to middle-aged adults, all turned to look at her. Some wore expressions of excitement, others of nervousness, but all held a spark of hope in their eyes. Helena felt a lump form in her throat as she gazed at them. These were people who, not so long ago, she would have dismissed without a second thought. Now she saw in each of them the potential for greatness, the same potential that Eduardo had seen in her. "Welcome, everyone," Helena began, her voice strong and clear. "I'm Helena Vasconcelos, and I'm here to tell you that your journey starts today. It won't be easy, believe me, I know, but I promise you it will be worth it." As she spoke, Helena could feel the energy in the room shift. The nervousness began to give way to determination, the excitement to focus. She shared her own story, not shying away from the ugliness of her past behavior, but emphasizing the power of change and the importance of second chances. "Each of you has a unique story, a unique set of challenges that you've faced," Helena continued. "But those challenges don't define you. They're simply part of the journey that brought you here. What defines you is what you choose to do from this moment forward." As she concluded her speech, Helena noticed a familiar face at the back of the room. Eduardo stood there, a proud smile on his face. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Helena felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This man whom she had once treated so cruelly had given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to become a better person. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions, orientations, and the excitement of new beginnings. As evening fell, Helena found herself back in the main hall, now empty and quiet. She stood by the window, gazing out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. A soft knock on the door interrupted her reverie. She turned to see Eduardo entering the room, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to her with a smile. "Quite a day, huh?" he said, coming to stand beside her at the window. Helena nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. "I still can't believe we've actually done it, that this is real." Eduardo chuckled. "Believe it. You've worked hard for this, Helena. You should be proud." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to thank you enough, Eduardo, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one, for showing me a better way to live." Eduardo shook his head, his expression serious. "You don't need to thank me, Helena. You did the hard work. You made the choice to change, to grow. I just provided an opportunity." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee and watching the city below. Finally, Helena spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "I want you to know, I'm committed to this, to making a difference, to helping others the way you helped me. I know I can't undo the harm I've done in the past, but I can try to balance the scales moving forward." Eduardo placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "That's all any of us can do, Helena. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. And from where I'm standing, the future looks pretty bright." As they continued to chat, discussing plans for the center and sharing stories from their respective journeys, Helena felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, truly purposeful. The woman who had once defined herself by her wealth and status now found her identity in something far more valuable, the ability to make a positive difference in the lives of others. And as she looked out at the city she had once viewed with such disdain, Helena Vasconcelos felt something she had never truly experienced before. Hope. Hope for herself, hope for the people she was now dedicated to helping, and hope for a world where second chances could lead to extraordinary transformations. Little did Helena know, her journey of redemption and growth was far from over. The coming months would bring new challenges, unexpected alliances, and opportunities for even greater impact. But for now, in this moment of quiet reflection, she allowed herself to simply be grateful for how far she had come, and excited for the path that lay ahead. As the weeks turned into months, Helena's community center flourished. Word spread quickly about the former socialite's transformation and her dedication to helping others, attracting both praise and skepticism from the public. Helena paid little attention to the chatter, focusing instead on the work at hand. One chilly autumn morning, as Helena was reviewing applications for the center's next round of programs, her assistant, Jake, knocked on her office door. "Ms. Vasconcelos," he said, poking his head in, "there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." Helena looked up, curiosity piqued. "Did she give a name?" Jake nodded, a slight frown on his face. "Yes, she said her name is Olivia Thornton." The name hit Helena like a punch to the gut. Olivia Thornton had been one of her closest friends in her previous life, or at least what passed for friendship in their superficial social circle. They had spent countless hours shopping, gossiping, and looking down on those they deemed beneath them. Helena hadn't spoken to Olivia since her fall from grace 2 years ago. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Helena nodded. "Send her in, please." Moments later, Olivia swept into the office, a vision of designer labels and perfectly coiffed hair. Her eyes darted around the modest space, taking in the simple furniture and the walls adorned with photos of smiling students and success stories. "Well, well," Olivia drawled, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "How the mighty have fallen." Helena stood, straightening her shoulders. "Hello, Olivia. It's been a while." Olivia's perfectly arched eyebrow rose. "Indeed it has. I must say, when I heard the rumors about your career change, I could scarcely believe it. But seeing you now in this, she gestured vaguely around the office, our environment, I suppose it must be true. Helena felt a flicker of her old defensiveness rise up, but she pushed it down. It is true. I've found a new purpose, Olivia, one that brings me far more fulfillment than our old life ever did, Olivia scoffed, perching herself on the edge of a chair. Oh, please, spare me the sanctimonious act, Helena. We both know this is just some elaborate PR stunt to rehabilitate your image after that disastrous gala. Helena shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. You're wrong, Olivia. This isn't an act. This is who I am now. For a moment, something flickered in Olivia's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or a hint of curiosity, but it was quickly replaced by her usual mask of cool disdain. Well, if you're done playing Mother Teresa, I have a proposition for you, Olivia said, reaching into her designer handbag. She pulled out a sleek folder and placed it on Helena's desk. The Thornton Foundation is looking to make a sizable donation to a worthy cause. Given our history, I thought I'd give you first refusal. Helena's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The Thornton Foundation was known for its generous philanthropic efforts, but it typically focused on high-profile, glamorous causes, not grassroots community centers in struggling neighborhoods. Cautiously, Helena opened the folder. Her eyes widened as she saw the figure on the proposed check. It was enough to fund the center's operations for years to come. This is extremely generous, Olivia, Helena said slowly, her mind racing. But I have to ask, why us? Why now? Olivia shrugged, examining her manicure. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. After all, we were friends once, weren't we? Helena studied Olivia's face, searching for any hint of her true motives. We were. But Olivia, if this donation comes with strings attached, if you expect me to use it to return to our old lifestyle, or to compromise the center's mission in any way, I'm afraid I'll have to decline. For a split second, Olivia's carefully constructed facade cracked. A look of genuine hurt flashed across her face before being quickly masked. Is that really what you think of me, Helena? That I'd try to sabotage your precious little project? Helena sighed, feeling a pang of guilt. I'm sorry, Olivia, I didn't mean to offend you. It's just, this work means everything to me now. I can't risk compromising it. Olivia stood abruptly, smoothing down her designer dress. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps I was mistaken in coming here. Clearly, you've moved on to loftier pursuits. As Olivia turned to leave, Helena felt a sudden urge to reach out to her old friend. Despite everything, she remembered the moments of genuine connection they had shared, buried beneath layers of superficiality. Olivia, wait! Helena called out. Olivia paused at the door, her hand on the knob. Why don't you stay? Let me show. You around the center, introduce you to some of our students. See for yourself what we're doing here. Olivia hesitated, conflict evident on her face. For a moment, Helena thought she would refuse, but then, almost imperceptibly, Olivia nodded. What followed was a tour unlike any other Helena had given. As they walked through the bustling corridors of the center, Helena watched Olivia's reactions closely. At first, her old friend maintained her aloof demeanor, barely glancing at the students and staff they passed. But as they entered the culinary training kitchen, something changed. A group of teenagers was gathered around a workstation, laughing and chatting as they prepared a complex dish under the guidance of one of the center's instructors. The aroma of spices and sautéing vegetables filled the air. Ms. Vasconcelos, one of the students, a young girl named Zoe, called out excitedly, "We're making that chicken marsala you taught us last week. Want to try it?" Before Helena could respond, Olivia stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the simmering pan. "Is that fresh thyme I smell?" Zoe nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am. We grow it right here in our rooftop garden." To Helena's astonishment, Olivia leaned in closer, inhaling deeply. "It reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen," she murmured almost to herself. Then, seeming to remember where she was, she straightened up, clearing her throat. "Well, it certainly smells adequate." But Helena had seen the flash of genuine interest, the moment of unguarded nostalgia. As they continued their tour, she noticed Olivia paying closer attention, asking questions about the programs and the students' backgrounds. By the time they returned to Helena's office, the tension between them had eased somewhat. Olivia sank into a chair, her usual poise slightly rumpled. "I have to admit," she said slowly, "this isn't quite what I expected." Helena smiled, pouring them both a cup of coffee. "It wasn't what I expected either when I first started. But Olivia, the work we do here, it changes lives. Not just the students, but mine too." Olivia was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee absently. When she spoke again, her voice was uncharacteristically soft. "You seem happy, Helena. Truly happy. I don't think I've ever seen you like this before." Helena leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. She took a sip of her own coffee before responding. "You know, Olivia, I think you're right. For the first time in a long time, I feel content, like I'm finally on the right path." Olivia raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "And what path is that exactly? Last I heard, you were still reeling from that disaster at Eduardo's event. What changed?" Helena's eyes sparkled with a newfound warmth as she recounted the events of the past few weeks. She told Olivia about her work at the shelter, the people she'd met, and the profound impact it had on her perspective. As she spoke, her hands moved animatedly, her voice filled with an enthusiasm that had been absent for years. "It's not just about the work," Helena explained. "It's about the connections I'm making. These people, Olivia, as they've shown me what real strength looks like, what perseverance means. I've learned more from them in a few weeks than I have in all my years in high society." Olivia listened intently, her expression a mix of surprise and admiration. "I have to admit, Helena, I never thought I'd see the day. You were always so focused on maintaining your image, your status." Helena nodded, a rueful smile on her face. "I was, and look where it got me. I was miserable, Olivia. Empty. I had everything money could buy, but I was hollow inside. Now for the first time I feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself." As they continued to talk, the bustling cafe around them seemed to fade into the background. Helena shared stories of the shelter residents, their struggles, their triumphs, and the unbreakable spirit they possessed. She spoke of Maria, the single mother who worked 3 jobs to provide for her children, and of Jack, the veteran who was slowly rebuilding his life after years on the streets. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes wide with interest. "And Eduardo? Have you spoken to him since, you know?" Helena's expression softened. "I have, actually. He's been incredibly understanding. More than I deserve, really. He's even offered to help with some of the shelter's initiatives." "That's unexpected," Olivia mused. "After what happened, I thought he'd want nothing to do with you." Helena shook her head. "That's the thing, Olivia. Eduardo isn't like us, like I used to be. He doesn't hold grudges or seek revenge. He saw an opportunity to make a real difference and he took it. It's inspiring, really." As they continued to talk, Helena found herself opening up more than she ever had before. She shared her fears, her insecurities, and the profound sense of purpose she'd discovered through her volunteer work. Olivia listened attentively, occasionally asking questions or offering words of encouragement. "You know," Olivia said after a while, "I always envied you, Helena. Your confidence, your seemingly perfect life. But seeing you now like this, I think I understand what true happiness looks like." Helena reached across the table, squeezing Olivia's hand. "It's not too late, you know, to make a change, to find that happiness for yourself." Olivia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "Start small," Helena advised. "Come to the shelter with me sometime. See for yourself what I've been talking about. You might be surprised at what you discover." As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, Helena felt a surge of gratitude for Eduardo's forgiveness, for the opportunity to remake herself, and for friends like Olivia who were willing to see and accept her change. Outside the cafe, the 2 women hugged, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just a few months ago. As they parted ways, Helena couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for what the future held. She had a long way to go, she knew, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the right path. The next day, Helena arrived at the shelter earlier than usual. There was a palpable energy in the air. Today was the day they would break ground on the new community garden project. It was an initiative Helena had spearheaded, working closely with Eduardo and local businesses to secure funding and resources. As she walked through the shelter's doors, she was greeted by a chorus of warm hellos and bright smiles. Maria, cradling her youngest child, approached Helena with a look of determination. "I want to help with the garden," Maria said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. "I used to have a small vegetable patch back home. I think I could be useful." Helena felt a surge of admiration for the woman's resilience. "We'd be honored to have your expertise, Maria, and I'm sure the children would love to learn from you." As more volunteers and shelter residents gathered, Helena found herself in the center of a whirlwind of activity. She coordinated teams, delegated tasks, and worked alongside everyone else, her designer clothes long since replaced by practical jeans and a t-shirt. Midway through the morning, a familiar face appeared at the shelter's entrance. Eduardo, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, surveyed the scene with a warm smile. "Looks like you've got quite the operation going here," he said, approaching Helena. She wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek, grinning. "We're making progress. I'm glad you could make it." Eduardo's eyes twinkled with amusement. "And missed the chance to see Helena Vasconcelos getting her hands dirty." "Never." As they worked side by side, planting seedlings and preparing garden beds, Helena found herself marveling at the turn her life had taken. Here she was, working in the dirt alongside a man she had once cruelly dismissed, surrounded by people she would have previously ignored. "You know," Eduardo said softly so only she could hear, "I'm proud of you, Helena. What you're doing here, it's making a real difference." Helena felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I couldn't have done it without your example," she replied. "You showed me what true strength and compassion look like." As the day wore on, the garden began to take shape. Raised beds filled with rich soil stood ready for planting. A small greenhouse gleamed in the afternoon sun, and a colorful mural painted by some of the shelter's younger residents adorned one wall. As the volunteers and residents gathered for a celebratory meal, Helena found herself overwhelmed with emotion. She looked around at the faces of those she had come to know and care for, Maria and her children, Jack the veteran, Eduardo, and so many others. These people, who had every reason to reject her, had instead welcomed her into their community and helped her find her true self. Standing up, Helena clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned to her. "I want to thank you all," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for your hard work today, but for everything you've taught me over these past few months. When I first came here, I was lost. I thought I had everything, but I was empty inside." She paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "You've shown me what really matters in life. Your strength, your kindness, your resilience. It's humbling and inspiring. This garden we've created together, it's more than just a place to grow food. It's a symbol of growth, of new beginnings, of the beauty that can arise from even the most difficult circumstances." Helena's gaze met Eduardo's, and she saw the pride and warmth in his eyes. "I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or social status. It's measured in the lives we touch, the kindness we show, and the community we build. So thank you, all of you, for giving me the chance to be part of something truly meaningful." As applause filled the room, Helena felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that her journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, old habits to overcome, and much more to learn. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Helena found herself alone in the new garden. She ran her hands over the freshly turned earth, marveling at the potential contained in each tiny seed they had planted. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Eduardo's voice came from behind her. Helena turned, smiling as he approached. "It really is. I can hardly believe we did all this in one day." Eduardo stood beside her, his gaze sweeping over the garden. "It's amazing what people can accomplish when they work together towards a common goal." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. "You know," Eduardo said softly, "when I first met you in that restaurant, I never would have imagined we'd end up here." Helena winced slightly at the memory. "I'm still so ashamed of how I behaved that day." Eduardo turned to face her, his expression serious but kind. "The past is the past, Helena. What matters is who you are now and the choices you make going forward." She nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I'm trying to be better, to do better." "And you are," Eduardo assured her. "The woman I see before me now is a far cry from the one who sneered at me for smelling like grease. You've grown, Helena. You've opened your heart." Helena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you. Your forgiveness, your willingness to give me a second chance. It meant everything." Eduardo smiled, reaching out to squeeze her hand gently. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in us to help us believe in ourselves." As they stood there, hand in hand, Helena felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her. She thought about all the lives they could touch, all the good they could do together. The garden was just the beginning. "So," Eduardo said, a hint of playfulness in his voice, "what's next for Helena Vasconcelos, community activist?" Helena laughed, the sound light and free. "You know, I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that whatever it is, I want to keep making a difference, to keep learning and growing." Eduardo nodded approvingly. "Well, whatever you decide, count me in. I have a feeling we make a pretty good team." As they walked back towards the shelter, Helena felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her for the second chance she'd been given, for the community she'd found, and for the person she was becoming. The sun had fully set now, and the first stars were beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. Helena paused for a moment, looking up at the vast expanse above them. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think the world was so small, that all that mattered was my little bubble of wealth and status. But now I see how vast and wonderful it really is. How many opportunities there are to make a difference, to connect with others." Eduardo nodded, following her gaze upward. "It's a big world out there, with room for all kinds of growth and change." As they resumed walking, Helena's mind was already racing with ideas for future projects, ways to expand their reach and help even more people. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, truly purposeful. The shelter's lights glowed warmly in the distance, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. As they approached, Helena could hear the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting out into the night. It was the sound of community, of belonging, a sound that not so long ago she would have dismissed as beneath her. Now, it was the sweetest music she had ever heard. Helena turned to Eduardo, a smile playing on her lips. "Ready to change the world?" she asked, only half joking. Eduardo grinned back, his eyes twinkling with shared purpose and understanding. "One garden at a time," he replied, and with that, they stepped back into the warmth of the shelter, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities tomorrow might bring, together,